Most people are afraid of being entirely themselves. They fear embracing parts of themselves that might be considered unacceptable, because doing so causes discomfort. To escape this discomfort, they divide themselves into two halves, conscious and unconscious light and shadows. In the conscious half, they construct an ideal image of themselves, formed by the fragments of their past. They consider good and acceptable. Consequently, in the unconscious half, they repress parts they perceive as bad, unacceptable, or problematic. In Jungian psychology, this repressed part of personality is termed the shadow. Unless the shadow is integrated into the personality, one can never reach their full potential. Instead, they remain incomplete, fractured, and partial, living a life of dissatisfaction and lack of fulfillment, rather than the abundant life that could have been. Often we face the strange paradox of being our worst obstacles, making irrational and puzzling decisions. We encounter mental and physical blocks that hinder our plans. It's as if an invisible force takes control, steering us away from the goals. We eagerly desire to achieve, trapped in this cycle of internal sabotage. We always find ourselves distanced from the destiny. We wish to conquer frequently unconscious motives, override our conscious decisions, especially in vital matters. What leads us to self-sabotage? How do we undermine our own plans without apparent reason? Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung shed light on these questions by exploring a fundamental part of the psyche he called the shadow. Let's visualize the shadow as a psychological chest, safeguarded in the realm of the unconscious. In this dark domain where the light of our consciousness does not reach, we deposit aspects we prefer to conceal. Several reasons drive us to hide certain unwanted aspects beneath the carpet of our minds. We repress these traits by banishing them to the depths of the psyche, as if they are not a part of us, but they are. And according to Jung, repressing our unwanted aspects will not solve the problem. In fact, it can have disastrous consequences, as these aspects take on a life of their own, operating in the darkness beyond the light of our awareness. This is the beginning of self-sabotage. The repressed parts of our personality emerge from the depths of our shadow, challenging our conscious minds. We find ourselves in a war against ourselves, not truly comprehending who the enemy is. Fortunately, there are ways to end this internal conflict rather than repressing what hides in the shadow. Jung suggested integrating it into our personality. This can only be achieved by making the unconscious conscious, unearthing what lies deep within our psyche. There's a deep-rooted misunderstanding about the shadow that tends to sow confusion and misinformation about its true role and how to integrate what has been suppressed. It's often thought that the shadow simply encompasses the dark and negative side of personality. This perception, influenced by its potential problematic repercussions, leads us to consider it the hidden abode of all our negative impulses. Often in psychological imagery, the shadow is symbolically represented as a dark figure, hinting at a sinister alter ego that exists outside of our consciousness. However, the essence of the shadow is something entirely different. The shadow resembles more a shady space than a dark and ominous figure. We could compare it to a draw in the human psyche, a place where the light of consciousness fails to illuminate. In this draw, we store all those repressed parts of our personality that we are not prepared or unable to face or reintegrate at the moment, perhaps due to various reasons like traumas or unfulfilled needs. So when we talk about working with the shadow and integrating it, we're not referring to merging with the shadow itself, but integrating and addressing the contents within it. The contents of the shadow are all those repressed parts of personality, those facets of the self residing in that dark place. It's like putting objects in that dark drawer; they would be shrouded in shadows. But when you take those same objects out and expose them to the sunlight, they will no longer be submerged in shadows. The same goes for those parts of the personality residing in the shadow. There's nothing inherently dark or negative about them. They've simply been relegated to a shadowy place operating beyond our consciousness, and often wreaking havoc due to that disconnect. These fragments, often referred to as aspects of the shadow, are somewhat like mini-personalities. Each of these mini-personalities is entirely yours, as they are fragments of your being. When they detach from your conscious part, and are placed in the darkness of the shadow, they separate and function autonomously from your conscious personality, that illuminated part. You identify as me just as our conscious personality or ego has its own perspectives, needs and goals. Each of our aspects in the shadow also has its own unique perspectives and agendas. These agendas may or may not clash with those of our conscious personality. When the agendas conflict, internal turmoil ensues, a battle against oneself. This struggle can manifest as procrastination and self-sabotage, hindering our progress towards positive changes. Now, to understand how this shadow-based self-sabotage can play a role in our lives and thwart our plans, let's delve into an example. Imagine a man who embraces his identity as someone who prefers solitude. His vision is to lead a thriving online business and reside in the serene tranquility of the countryside to minimize interaction with others. Something he genuinely believes is his ultimate longing. However, despite how viable this idea of self-sufficiency seems, he continually hampers his own progress. For instance, an opportunity arises to purchase a house in the countryside at an excellent price. But for an insubstantial reason, he chooses to reject it. This fragmented self or mini-personality hiding in the man's shadow, wanting to live in the countryside, represents a repressed characteristic. The desire for human connection due to past wounds from damaging interactions with others. This shadow was created, and the need for connection with other people was dispatched to the shadowy drawer of the unconscious. The man isn't aware that this unwanted aspect of himself has become a shadow government from there. It attempts to undermine the actions of a fearful isolationist disguised as a lover of solitude and independence. But in reality, deeply craves connection with fellow beings from the depths of his psyche. This repressed mini-personality plays a paradoxical game. On one hand, this aspect of the shadow wants to be part of his conscious awareness. It wants its motivations heard, its desires felt, and its needs fulfilled. So it sabotages the firm individualism of the conscious personality and all its efforts toward independence. Consequently, he lives with roommates and does his laundry in a public laundromat, where he encounters many people. This situation might seem inconvenient and unwanted from the perspective of his conscious personality. But it's precisely where the aspect of the shadow wants him to be. On the other hand, the aspect of the shadow doesn't want to be illuminated, and its evasion is understandable, as it not only represents the unwanted, but also rebels against the person who dispossessed it. If it is found, it will lose its sovereignty. So as long as it remains in the shadows, it maintains the power to autonomously sabotage, undermine and destroy. It remains a singular and above all safe personality. But for this reason, it's in perpetual conflict with its host. There are various different reasons why self-sabotage can occur. But in the example of the man, the self-sabotage stems from an aspect of the shadow responding to an unmet need, which is the need for connection. From the perspective of this aspect of the shadow, the conscious personality's agenda of moving towards extreme independence is entirely opposed to that need. Deep down, this mini-personality knows that when its host achieves financial success, he'll have enough money to have his own house without roommates, his own vehicle and his own washer and dryer. So he won't go to the laundromat where there's much social interaction. The aspect of the shadow also realizes that having more money means having more ability to neglect and ignore its need for connection and socialization. And so, in a desperate attempt to preserve the scarce connection with other people, this aspect of the shadow receives, it sabotages his financial success and manipulates the conscious personality to avoid financial success by making inexplicably unwise business decisions. Additionally, it could also create various rationalizations and mental blocks about success. And maybe every time he wants to work on his online business, He suddenly feels overwhelmingly tired and just wants to take a nap when previously he was perfectly energized and awake. Now, the solution for self-sabotage stemming from a shadow aspect with an unmet need is quite straightforward. The first step is to recognize the needs and agendas of your conscious personality and the needs of each of your shadow aspects. This requires observation and brutal honesty. If this man in the example is very honest with himself, there will be many clues throughout the day that he actually values connection and a sense of belonging. He just has to be willing to notice these things and admit them to himself. So once he realizes this need, it's his role as the conscious personality to weave this need from the aspect of the shadow into the conscious personality's agenda for financial success and make the necessary changes to fulfill that need. Instead of envisioning himself becoming entirely independent when he achieves financial success, he can imagine having more time and freedom due to the money he earns, and using that time and freedom to socialize and connect with friends and loved ones. He feels authentic connections with the solution would be to address the needs of the shadow aspect and thus reintegrate them into your being. This way, the shadow aspect doesn't have to sabotage the goals and dreams of the conscious personality to ensure those needs are met. In fact, it would cease being a shadow as it's been illuminated by our consciousness and taken out of the shadowy draw it resided in.